Ugh, it smells like plankton in here. Ugh.
What a predicament!
Thank you for downloading What a Predicament. I'm Alex. Welcome to the first podcast recorded live from the belly of a whale. It's sticky and wet, and it's no picnic. For me, at least. For the whale, I was probably a real treat. But the way this podcast works is I while away my time in here, while there's not a heck of a lot else to do, and I'll investigate some of the predicaments faced by the outside world. Now, it sounds pretty selfless, but honestly, there's really not too much to do in here. You'd be surprised. Now, I'm not promising to solve any of the big global issues, just shedding a little bit of light on some of the lighter issues we're faced with in modern day life. And speaking of lighters, this week...
Cannabis. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Cannabis, a genus of plant that has been grown and harvested for more than 8,500 years. It's been farmed for use as an industrial fibre and as a textile. It's up there. Cannabis is refined into products like cloth, paper, rope, resin, insulation, and fuel. It's apparently considered pretty ecologically viable, like it takes up less land area to farm compared to something like cotton, and produces 250% more fibre than cotton if you gave it the same amount of area to grow in. Now, as a material, once it's all harvested, it's known for its durability, but it's also comfortable. It's one of those fabrics that gets softer the longer you use it, so it's been used as a clothing for millennia, going right back to Mesopotamia. It's also particularly porous, so it holds dye really well, which makes it, again, great for clothes. Really breathable. It's naturally resistant to mold and ultraviolet light, so it's an obvious choice for that sort of thing. It's farmed in New Zealand by only, surprisingly, considering how versatile it seems to be, only a very small number of people. For some reason, it's a crop you can't just go out and grow. Here's the predicament. If you want to grow it, or even possess one of these plants yourself, you'd be breaking New Zealand law. Now, visitors to New Zealand will be well aware that biosecurity takes plant matter very seriously. As a nation, we pride ourselves on our nature and our environment, and we're so strict on it, even having boots in your baggage that have maybe dirt from a foreign trip up a mountain in Japan or something could get you in trouble. Now, I'm thinking that might explain why cannabis has been banned. As a non-native plant, maybe it could possibly upset the country's delicate, precious ecological balance, so I thought I'd ask a representative from the Ministry for Primary Industries about the threat that the cannabis plant poses to this beautiful Pacific nation.
Craig Hughes is my name. I'm the manager of North Passenger for the Ministry for Primary Industries, and that entails looking after the Auckland Airport and a few other things such as our detection technology, which is our dog program, and also our X-ray machine technology.
Why is it important that New Zealand's so vigilant in what can and can't be brought into the country?
Well, we're all about protecting New Zealand, but also growing it, so that they go hand in hand together, growing and protecting New Zealand. And we've got so much here that's unique to the world, and we have one big advantage. We live on an island down the bottom of the world, so we've got a competitive advantage in relation to biosecurity, especially.
What sort of impact could a foreign fruit or plant have on our native ecology?
There's a variety of costs, both to industry and some have health issues, of course, for the population, but also some of our native animals and so forth. So depending on what sort of thing we're talking about, whether it's pest or disease, it can range from millions to many, many millions of dollars of cost for New Zealand Inc., effectively.
What are some of the more unusual things you've seen people trying to bring through?
Yeah, the list is huge in relation to that, and especially through Auckland Airport there, we've had people trying to bring in a variety of live animals, for example, and that can range from small dogs to lizards to snakes to insects and fish, for example, live fish recently. It's just anything you can think of, effectively, that'll go into a suitcase or a hand luggage. or in fact will be strapped to people's bodies. That's another thing. If they're intentionally trying to bring things in, they can often put them in, sew them into clothing, or even strap things to their bodies, like snakes, for example. In Australia, there's a recent guy who was found with juvenile cobras strapped to his legs.
Anything that comes through where you just look at your workmates and you're just like, well, there's no precedent for this. What do we do here?
The good thing is we've got some pretty strict rules about what can and can't come in. So it's pretty much everything has to have if it's going to be allowed to come in, it has to be inspected, and then it has to fit within what we call our import health standards. So that's why it can take some time to get through the airport, and you've got a lot of things to be inspected. But the bizarre things are just... we've had people trying to sneak in holy water from the Ganges with bits and pieces floating in it. We've had, and one of the things that amazes our guys sometimes is that the people who are interested in sort of areas like beekeeping, or interested in sort of types of plants, they're the ones often who are sometimes sneaking these things in, and that we scratch our heads and think, they must realise that they're putting their own area of interest in jeopardy with diseases and pests and so forth as well. So,
are there certain plants that are okay, or is it just a blanket ban across anything?
So the way we work it, when I mentioned the import health standards before, you can effectively bring anything into the country, but it has to be compliant with an import health standard. So they're online and they're on our website, and so if anyone's thinking about bringing something in, they look into there and see what has to be done to the product or plant or whatever before it comes here, and then after, or at the border. So for an example would be if it's a new type of species, they also have to go through the IRMA, which is new organisms legislation as well. So it's very complicated, but what it does is protect New Zealand from these unwanted pests and diseases.
If someone is caught trying to come through airport security with something that's prohibited, what would be the consequences? What's your next step?
So under the Biosecurity Act, that's attempting to bring in unauthorised goods, we call it, and that holds a maximum fine of $100,000 or 5 years imprisonment and or. So that's pretty serious, and we have had some serious cases in the last few years. Probably one of the highest prison sentences we've had has been a guy who was organising the importation of parrots' eggs from Asia. He was running an operation where he was organising them to be bought in Thailand for a very small amount of money, really, bringing them here, hatching them and selling them as mature birds for a huge profit. So he went to jail for 5 years, and that was his second offence. So the courts take it very seriously, as do we.
And what if someone had tried to bring in something like a cannabis plant?
Well, obviously our friends at Customs would have an interest in that. We don't deal with drugs, but of course it has a dual influence in relation to the offending, because it would come under the Biosecurity Act, but also under the Customs and Excise Act in relation to importing drugs. So not many people bother with a plant because we've got plenty of them here, but obviously, the drug side of we take it very seriously. Obviously, we help Customs a lot in locating a lot of drugs at the border as well.
I was going to say, do you see it as a threat to the ecology of New Zealand, or is it a different issue?
But any plant with especially with any soil on it, has the potential to bring in a disease or a pest. You see, so depending on where it gets planted and the area in which it may survive or may not, that's how a lot of the diseases and pests that have arrived in New Zealand over the time that we've been colonising it. And you see many examples of that, like gorse, for example, is the bad one, and various other things like, one of the topical ones at the moment is, I'm not sure how, but it's been here for a while, but it's carry dieback fungus, which is affecting our carry trees in New Zealand.
So, the ban on cannabis might not strictly be an environmental issue, but it is, apparently, a drug. And like paracetamol or antihistamines or any other drug, of course you're going to want to restrict or control the access that people have to it. Now, after some further investigation, I learned that cannabis has indeed been used medically for thousands of years. Nowadays, it's used to relieve pain and nausea, to treat patients suffering from conditions such as PTSD and schizophrenia, breast and liver cancer, epilepsy, strokes, glaucoma, anorexia. It is apparently great at restoring the appetite, all the way to cerebral palsy. And actually working on this episode, I watched a really powerful documentary about a woman suffering from severe cerebral palsy who finds relief using cannabis, which the difference it made in her condition is night and day. It's mind-blowing. Also, just recently, the National Geographic won a Webby Award for their documentary, Cannabis for Kids, the children behind the debate, which looks at children who are treated using cannabis. I'll link to both of those documentaries on the podcast website, whatacat.co.nz. Personally, I'm lucky enough to not have any of those conditions which might require that I need medical cannabis, knock on wood, or rather knock on whale stomach lining. So I asked someone who'd know a bit more about the status of prescription pot.
My name is Chris Fowley. I'm the president and spokesperson for NORMAL, which is the National Organisation for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
What can you tell me about the medical applications of cannabis?
Well, cannabis has been used for medicine for thousands of years, and it's only been in the last sort of 80 that it's been prohibited. But it used to be one of the most commonly used medicines in the world, right up till the 1930s. And here in New Zealand, it was used in the 1950s in hospitals here in New Zealand. So it was prohibited as part of this global war on drugs, which really should not have ever affected the medical use of cannabis. In fact, there are clauses in all the international drug treaties and in our own Misuse of Drugs Act that allow for the medical use of cannabis. But for various political reasons, it's been, in effect, impossible for patients to get access to medical cannabis, certainly legally. Up until very recently, we've had very small and minor changes that have allowed a very small number of people to use, a very small number of medical cannabis products. But we actually have almost 200,000 people in New Zealand using cannabis medically. It's 1 in 20 people. This is according to the government's own statistics. It's 42% of all people who use cannabis are actually using it medically. So this is vast numbers of people, and they're being forced to access it in unsafe and potentially dangerous ways. They're using cannabis that they don't know the provenance of. They don't know the active ingredients. They don't know the strength. They don't know whether it has pesticides or things like that. And because of the black market, really the only feasible way that people are consuming it is by smoking it, or if they're making extractions and things, then it's often being done in dangerous ways that could endanger themselves or people around them. So really, as a matter of public health safety, given that we have 200,000 sick and vulnerable New Zealanders who are accessing medical cannabis already at the moment, but through the black market in these dangerous ways, we need to bring that within the law and make that access safe and legal, and give them access to products that are known, and that they have a variety of options available to them, not just Sativex, which is a pharmaceutical extraction and very, very expensive and well out of reach of the vast majority of people. There's only been a total of 100 prescriptions at the moment. Only about, 35 are active, because patients will eventually manage to get the prescription once they jump through all those hoops that they have to do, while they're sick and dying, and be made to round up specialists and peer reviews and things. But most patients that I talk to, they can barely afford to get that prescription filled once, and they certainly can't afford the repeat. So that's a real problem with Sativex. You need a variety of options, and other countries around the world don't just have one product. We don't just hand a monopoly to one pharmaceutical company and say, that's it for everything. If you have pain, if you have a heart condition, if you have epilepsy, whatever condition a patient has, there's a variety of medications available for that. And it should be the same with cannabis. There should be a variety of products available, a variety of different formulations and strengths, a variety of prices and different ways of taking it. And for some patients, growing their own and having natural herbal cannabis may be the most effective way to have that. And who are we, or who are politicians to sort of say no to that? They're not trained in it. They're not experts. If the doctor and the patient are saying that's what's best for them, then that's all that it should take.
What about globally, how the idea of medical cannabis is changing, and how does New Zealand sort of fit in compared to global trends?
Well, we're very far behind, but we're caught up in it. The reason that we've had the changes that have happened in New Zealand in the last year, it hasn't happened in isolation. It's been because of what's been going on around the world, particularly with what's happening in Australia. I think that because of the close relationship that we have and the fact that our medical approvals are harmonised, our food laws are harmonised, there's a lot of harmonisation between the two countries. Now you have two states in Australia where it's just been made legal for medical purposes, one in Victoria, the other Tasmania. Those laws went through very, very quickly, within a matter of weeks. But when you make it available somewhere like that, it makes it inevitable here that if the war on drugs wasn't futile enough, when you have a country right on our doorstep like that, where New Zealanders can jump on a plane with no visa and just go over and come back, and when we have a court ruling recently that has reinforced what has always been in the law, it's not a loophole, it's a deliberate clause of the Misuse of Drugs Act, and every country and all the international drug treaties say this in them. You prescribe the medicine in one country, you can go to another country with it. So any Kiwi will be able to jump on a plane, go over to Sydney or Melbourne, get their medical cannabis, come back here the same day, and bring a month with them, get a special on the cheap airfares. That's entirely legal. There will be nothing that they can do to stop that. The only thing that's stopping it now at the moment is to go to America is going to set you back too much money. It's not going to be worth it for people to go over there and get a month's worth of cannabis and keep coming back. But Australia makes that entirely feasible. So, what's happening all around the world, the New Zealand government can't just keep its head in the sand.
It's a shame because New Zealand has traditionally been a country that's usually been quite socially progressive. The first country to give women the vote. More recently, we got on the Marriage Amendment Act. I think of it as a part of our national identity. Do you think that means decriminalisation would be inevitable?
Yeah. It is puzzling why we can lead the world in some areas and in this area we don't. And yet we led the world in needle exchanges, and the rest of the world looks at envy at our program and can see why we have this really, really low rate of HIV in New Zealand compared to other countries as a direct result of that. We led the world in prostitution law reform, in civil unions and same-sex marriages. And none of those things you could really call a vote winner as such. They were just the right thing to do. They were all actually contentious issues that bring out really conservative people and redneck kind of reactions. But the governments of the day, both Labour and National, just knew it was the right thing to do. It's just really puzzling why they view drugs as somehow different to those others. For me, the issues are exactly the same. They're about personal autonomy, about having the freedom to express yourself and to do what you want and to live your life if you're not harming other people, and to not have the state interfering and creating all these, these problems and making, life less safe and more dangerous for people.
Well, you hear people talking about one of the reasons why it isn't being accepted so quickly is the sort of lack of clinical studies. And it's weird because it's not a really obscure plant. As you mentioned, it's been used for throughout humanity's existence. Why isn't it being studied?
Well, this is the thing, is they make it so hard to study, and you can't study it. Try and get a permit that involves giving it to people. They will bring you before an ethics committee and say, what the hell, you're not going to give a drug that gets people high to people? Oh my goodness. So they've actually made it impossible, and it's notorious in America is that, it's harder to get a permit to research cannabis than to research heroin or any other drug.
Like there are methadone clinics.
Medical cannabis, the guidelines that they have for prescribing, for allowing access to medical cannabis are tougher than for any other drug. Like, you have to be dying in hospital. There's no other drug that has that restriction on it. It's the toughest out of anything. So that holds back the research.
Well, to go back to something you'd mentioned earlier, I just thought was a bit funny. You'd talked about the getting high aspect. Being a medicine, I wouldn't know anything about this. What is this getting high? Is this like something people do that turns them into monsters, or?
You're talking about after consuming cannabis?
Yeah. I'm assuming being this illegal substance, it's probably got it must have these horrible sort of reactions that people have to it.
Right. I've got to say, if you're not one of the 84% of people in New Zealand who have tried cannabis by the time they're 21, you're in a very small minority. But cannabis affects people in different ways. The main thing is that you can tell the effects pretty quickly, and it's fairly benign, and it goes away pretty quick. So if people don't enjoy it, they just don't have it again. It's not like taking acid or doing something really full on. But the important thing as well to remember with medical cannabis in particular is people don't need to take the same dose that people do to get high. The threshold for medicinal effects is actually, in most cases, it's below the threshold that you would sort of feel a psychoactive effect. It depends why they're using it. If they're using it for pain relief, then that is more like what you would need for a psychoactive effect, because in that situation you're acting on neurotransmitters and things. But if you're doing it for other medical reasons around the body, and that people can often take non-psychoactive dosages and just remain completely unaffected. But in general, the main effect of cannabis is that it sort of intensifies what you're doing right now. So if you're not feeling good and you take some cannabis, like if you're feeling anxious or depressed, then it might amplify that. But if you're listening to some nice music or enjoying some nice food or enjoying a friend's company and that, then it will usually make that better. And that's why people take it. They don't take it because it makes them feel bad. They take it because it makes them feel better. And particularly when you look at regular users who have made it part of their life, it's not because it's addictive or they're sort of forced into it or that they're constantly struggling to give up or anything. It's part of their life because it makes them feel better. Now whether that relaxes them at the end of the day, it lets them sleep better, it lets them connect with their children or their partners, lets them forget the sort of worries of the world and just be in the moment. So there's a lot of different reasons why people take it, but generally it's a conscious choice, and it's done for reasons that they want to feel better.
So that might be the crux of the issue. It seems like despite its wonderful practical uses, there's a blanket ban on cannabis because, unfortunately, while it does have both textile and medical uses, it's basically crystal meth. You know what they say, if something sounds too good to be true. To really explore the predicament of cannabis in any kind of balanced way, it's important to hear the other side of the story and try and interview a user to see the grim face of abuse firsthand. Now, I found someone who was willing to permit me to interview them about their drug use, but of course, due to the illegal nature of his activities, I've had to disguise his voice. And my first thought was doing the thing where you make their voice low, like the criminal informants you see on the news with the blacked out silhouetted faces. But I thought, due to the nature of this individual's crimes, why go low when we could get high? So I sat down with my subject and a whole heap of helium balloons to talk about the highs and lows of cannabis abuse. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Alex. It's good to be here.
So I understand you've used cannabis before, not for its versatility as a textile, but for its psychoactive properties.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was completely intentional?
Yeah.
So what was the craziest thing you ever did on drugs? An all-night bender, a wild, crazy police chase, or...
I saw the new Star Wars movie in 3D while I was high. That was pretty crazy.
Oh, that's sort of what I was getting at. But I take it you'd be what? You're a beneficiary?
No. I'm a studio engineer for one of the country's largest media organisations.
Okay, so you've managed to hold down a day job, but in what ways? What I'm trying to get at, in what ways has cannabis negatively impacted your life?
I suppose it's cost me a little bit of money over the years.
And now you're a full-on addict?
No, not at all. I mean, I use it maybe half a dozen times over the course of, say, a month. And even there'll be months and months will go by where I won't even touch it. So it's certainly not anything that, oh, yikes, the helium's wearing off a bit.
Oh, yikes.
I think I've been unmasked.
Yeah. Oh,
should I take more helium or?
Well, they probably get it by now.
Yeah, you're right. I guess there's not much point in keeping this thing.
No.
Yeah.
Well, should I go, or... No, I wouldn't quite yet. You've still got to come in and record the other half of this conversation. Yeah, sure. Stoners are weird, aren't they? Now, looks like, really, when you boil it down, this whole predicament of the legal status of cannabis in New Zealand, it isn't really so bad in practice. You can argue the morals of it, but it seems like most people who want cannabis seem to be able to find it without too much effort, and only a fraction of users are ever penalised. The debate rages on, but the numbers don't lie. Cannabis users are farmers. They're patients and doctors alike, students and teachers, tradies and CEOs, average Joe Kiwi and members of parliament. They're podcasters. Now, despite its legal status, people seem to find it and use it. Official statistics from Auckland University's Alcohol and Public Health Research Unit show half of New Zealanders aged 15 to 65 have tried cannabis, and 1 in 6 define themselves as regular users. That's about 1.5 million ordinary Kiwis who flout the law and have come into possession of this particular plant. Which sounds funny to even say, that a group of people looked at a naturally growing, naturally occurring plant and said, there, that's illegal. It's like, you may as well say clouds are illegal, or mountains or streams, but it's beside the point. A survey of 1,750 New Zealanders concluded that 71% of the people surveyed supported the idea of a medical marijuana regime in New Zealand, which sounds like a gateway to reform to me. With numbers like that, it sounds like the people have spoken. Thanks to my guests this week, Craig Hughes and Chris Fowley, both really cool guys to talk to. You can find a bit more about Chris's campaign for law reform at normal.org.nz, that's NORML, which will tell you about how you can help be a catalyst for change. Thanks to the anonymous cannabis smoker I interviewed as well, who, in a shocking twist, ended up being me all along. Thanks also to John Galliers for the podcast cover art. Thanks to Tim Raby for lending me his vocal skills for the episode title there at the beginning. The opening theme music for this podcast is a derivative of The Little Hotel of Horrors by Decamentarium, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0. This podcast is a What a Cat production. Catch all of the previous and future episodes on iTunes or wherever you normally find your podcasts. They're also all available on the official What a Cat Productions website, whatacat.co.nz. Now there I will also have links to the documentaries I mentioned in this episode. Thanks to you for finding this and for listening. Now, if you cast your mind back to last week on What a Predicament, Episode 3, What Happened to Deja Voodoo, you would have heard yourself an opportunity to win a copy of Deja Voodoo's debut album on vinyl. Well, once I put that out there, it just lit the social media world on fire. I was inundated with people trying to win a copy, so I would like to congratulate Ian and Lucas. You've both got copies on the way if you haven't received it already of Deja Voodoo's Brown Sabbath on vinyl. Now, just with the massive influx of emails I received, it's pretty darn hard to work through that kind of volume. So, in case I miss a couple in the flurry, there may still be a chance to win. You can either email me, whatacatproductions@gmail.com, or you can check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/whatapredicament, and touch base with me to get a copy of that one on vinyl. Starving in the belly of a whale. I wish I could remember, there's that Tom Waits song, Starving in the Belly of a Whale. Wish I could remember how that goes. I'd love to hum it in a situation like this. It'd be perfect, but of course it would be illegal to perform his song on my podcast without getting the proper permission, which I cruelly, ironically, can't get from inside this blubbery prison. Guess I'm in here for the long haul. It seems weird, like you'd have to think there's no way John Key has gone throughout his life without knowing users and being like, oh, look, it hasn't screwed up their lives. Like,
I mean, look at him. He was a banker in the 80s. I mean, if anything,
that would have been coked
up to the eyeball.
That would have been like
now, I couldn't
least.
Possibly allege that John Key would have been a coke-using banker, but he certainly would have known a few.